A young skater's peaceful afternoon spirals into chaos when a notorious biker gang sets their sights on him, hurling insults and threats. The crowd watches in silence until a familiar face steps out of the shadows. Snoop Dogg, with his calm authority, turns the tables in a way no one could have imagined. What unfolds next is a moment of courage and justice that will leave you inspired. In the quiet, sunlit town of Cedar Pines, the streets were lined with modest homes and small businesses, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Despite its charm, the town harbored unspoken tensions. A biker gang known as the Iron Vipers ruled the area with an intimidating presence, often terrorizing anyone they perceived as weak or different. Their reputation cast a shadow over the otherwise peaceful community, leaving most residents too afraid to stand up to them. Among the town's younger residents was Omari Johnson, a bright and determined 17-year-old with a passion for skateboarding. With his smooth, dark skin, short curls, and an ever-present backpack covered in patches, Omari stood out in the crowd. He dreamed of one day becoming a professional skater, often escaping the town's rigid atmosphere by practicing flips and tricks at the small skate park. His board carried him away from the town's stifling dynamics, offering freedom and expression. Omari wasn't oblivious to the challenges he faced as a young black man in a predominantly white town, but he refused to let that hold him back. He'd faced his share of rude comments and stares, but always stayed focused on his goals. On one particular afternoon, Omari found himself alone at the skate park. The sun bathed the concrete ramps in golden light as he perfected his moves. It was his sanctuary, a place to clear his mind. Little did he know the stillness of that afternoon would soon shatter. In the distance, the low growl of motorcycle engines signaled the arrival of trouble. The Iron Vipers were headed his way, and Omari would soon find himself at the center of an unforgettable confrontation. Omari launched himself off the ramp, his skateboard spinning beneath him before landing with a clean thud on the concrete. The skate park, nestled in the corner of Cedar Pines' Central Park, was almost empty. He liked it that way, just him, his board, and the sound of wheels against pavement. Here, he could be himself, free from the weight of people's judgment or expectations. For Omari, skating wasn't just a hobby. It was a way to dream of something bigger, beyond the limits of a small town that often felt too confining. The late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows over the park, and Omari's focus was on nailing a particularly tricky move. But his concentration faltered when the distant rumble of motorcycles shattered the quiet. The sound grew louder, and soon the unmistakable roar of engines filled the air. Omari's eyes flicked to the parking lot, where a group of bikers began pulling in. His heart sank. The Iron Vipers were notorious in Cedar Pines. Everyone knew their name, and no one dared to cross them. Vince, their leader, was the type of man whose reputation preceded him. A towering figure with a shaved head and a snake tattoo slithering up his neck, he was both feared and loathed. Vince dismounted first, scanning the park like a predator searching for prey. When his gaze landed on Omari, a grin spread across his face, a grin that promised trouble. The bikers began dismounting their bikes, their boots crunching against the gravel as they moved toward the park. Omari gripped his skateboard tighter, debating whether to leave or stay. Running might make things worse, but staying felt equally dangerous. He decided to keep skating, hoping they would lose interest and move on. As he attempted another trick, their mocking laughter rang out, cutting through the air. Omari tried to ignore them, but his movements faltered under the weight of their stares. Vince motioned for his gang to follow, and they began closing in, their shadows stretching across the pavement. Omari's sanctuary was quickly transforming into a trap, and the once peaceful park now felt like hostile territory. Omari tried to focus on the rhythm of his movements, but the oppressive presence of the Iron Vipers made it impossible. He pushed off the concrete, attempting another trick, when Vince's gruff voice rang out, echoing across the park. Hey, kid, what are you doing out here all alone? Vince called out, his tone laced with mockery. His gang chuckled, their footsteps deliberate as they spread out, forming a loose circle around the skate area. Omari ignored them, his heart pounding, and skated to the opposite end of the park. His usual confidence faltered under their scrutiny. It wasn't the first time he'd encountered hostility, but there was something more sinister about this group. Hey, I'm talking to you, Vince barked again, this time louder. His voice carried the weight of someone who expected immediate obedience. When Omari didn't respond, Vince's expression darkened. "Looks like he's too good for us, huh?" said one of the bikers, a wiry man with a crooked grin. The gang laughed, their voices rising in a chorus of taunts. Another biker, a stocky man with tattoos covering his arms, picked up a loose soda can and kicked it toward Omari. It skittered across the pavement, stopping at his feet. "Why don't you show us some tricks, hotshot?" Vince sneered. "Or are you scared?" Omari stopped skating, clutching his board tightly. He glanced around the park, hoping someone might intervene, but the few bystanders nearby quickly turned away, pretending not to notice. His chest tightened. He didn't want to give them the reaction they were looking for, but staying silent only seemed to embolden them. "Hey, kid," Vince said, stepping forward until he was only a few feet away. "I'm talking to you. What's in that backpack? Bet you got something good in there." Omari instinctively clutched his bag closer. His voice came out shakier than he wanted. "I don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" Vince echoed, laughing. "You hear that, boys? He doesn't want trouble." The gang erupted in laughter again, their taunts growing louder. One of them, a lanky man with a scar across his cheek, grabbed Omari's skateboard and held it up like a trophy. "Nice board," he said, examining it. "Bet you saved up a lot for this, huh?" Omari stepped forward, his jaw tightening. "Give it back." "Or what?" Scarface grinned, holding the board just out of reach. The gang closed in tighter, their presence suffocating. Omari felt trapped, his pulse pounding in his ears. Just as he opened his mouth to protest, Vince leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "You don't belong here, kid. Why don't you skate on back to wherever you came from?" The words stung, sharp and unmistakable in their intent. Omari's hands balled into fists at his sides, but he knew better than to lash out. He glanced around desperately, searching for an escape or help. The air in the park felt heavier now, thick with tension and fear. A small group of bystanders, parents with children, joggers, and teenagers, stood at a safe distance, watching the unfolding scene with anxious eyes. None of them dared to step forward. A middle-aged woman holding a stroller glanced at Omari, her brow furrowing with concern. She tugged at her husband's sleeve. "Shouldn't we do something?" she whispered. The man shook his head quickly, his gaze fixed on the gang. "Are you crazy? That's the Iron Vipers. You don't mess with them unless you want trouble." Her face tightened, conflicted, but she didn't press further. Another jogger, a young man in earbuds, paused briefly to take in the scene. His hand hovered over his phone, as though debating whether to call someone. Ultimately, he shook his head and jogged on, leaving Omari to face the gang alone. The bikers laughed louder now, their mocking voices echoing across the park. Omari's skateboard was still in Scarface's hands, and Vince loomed over him, spitting out insults with venom. "Nobody's gonna help you, kid. Look around. You're on your own." And he wasn't wrong. The witnesses either turned away entirely or pretended to be preoccupied. A group of teens sitting on a nearby bench quickly shuffled off, their eyes glued to the ground as they avoided the confrontation. Omari glanced at the scattered faces, his chest tightening with each passing second. The realization hit him hard. Nobody was coming to his rescue. Fear gripped the crowd just as much as it did him, and the gang thrived on that fear. Vince stepped closer, smirking. "See? No one wants to mess with us. They know better." He gestured toward the onlookers with a lazy wave. "You think any of these cowards are gonna stand up for you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Omari's breath hitched, but he refused to let them see his fear. He straightened his shoulders slightly, swallowing hard. Unbeknownst to the bikers, however, help was closer than they realized. A tall figure dressed in a casual hoodie and sunglasses stood at the park's edge, silently observing the scene unfold. His presence, unnoticed at first, would soon change everything. The sound of gravel crunching beneath sneakers was faint, but to those paying attention, it marked the arrival of someone unexpected. Standing just outside the park's perimeter, Snoop Dogg surveyed the scene. His tall frame was draped in a loose gray hoodie, his sunglasses shielding sharp, watchful eyes. He had planned for a quiet walk after finishing a local project, but stumbled upon something that demanded his attention. At first, Snoop remained still, assessing the situation. The gang's loud taunts carried across the park, mingling with the sound of Omari's skateboard scraping against the ground as Scarface dropped it deliberately. Omari's defiance, while admirable, was being smothered by the gang's menacing energy. A mother who had been inching closer to the scene with concern froze when she caught sight of Snoop. Her eyes widened, and she nudged her husband, whispering excitedly, "That's Snoop Dogg! What's he doing here?" Word spread quickly among the bystanders. Whispers traveled like wildfire, with many pulling out their phones, recognizing the iconic rapper and entertainer. Some aimed their cameras at him, while others shot cautious glances between the gang and Snoop, as if silently urging him to step in. Snoop removed his sunglasses and stepped forward, his gait slow but purposeful. His presence alone seemed to alter the atmosphere. The bikers didn't notice at first, too consumed with mocking Omari. Vince grabbed the skateboard again, holding it high above Omari's head with a sneer. "What are you gonna do, huh? Cry for mommy?" Snoop's deep voice broke through the jeering laughter. "How about you put that board down and pick on someone your own size?" The gang froze mid-laugh, heads snapping toward the voice. Vince turned, his confident smirk faltering slightly when he saw Snoop's towering figure. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, masking his unease with bravado. Snoop walked closer, his hands in his pockets, exuding an effortless coolness. "Just a man who doesn't like seeing kids get bullied," he said evenly. Scarface narrowed his eyes, squinting at Snoop. "Wait a second. Is that?" Before he could finish, Vince barked, "I don't care who he is!" "Get lost, old man. This doesn't concern you." Snoop's lips twitched into a knowing smile, his gaze calm but firm. "See, that's where you're wrong. It concerns me when cowards like you mess with kids who didn't do a thing to deserve it." The crowd, emboldened by Snoop's presence, began inching closer. The bikers, meanwhile, exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't used to someone standing up to them, let alone someone as composed and unshaken as this stranger. "Let's settle this the easy way," Snoop added, his voice low but commanding. "Or we can do it the hard way. Your call." The tension in the air thickened as Vince clenched his fists, the confrontation on the brink of escalating. The park grew eerily silent, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. All eyes were on the confrontation unfolding between Snoop Dogg and the biker gang. Vince's arrogant demeanor cracked for just a moment before he squared his shoulders, determined not to lose face. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Vince sneered, stepping closer to Snoop. "This doesn't concern you, so why don't you take your fan club and leave?" Snoop didn't flinch, his calm, measured voice cutting through the tension. "I'm not here for attention, homie. I'm here because I don't like seeing cowards picking on kids." He gestured toward Omari, who was now standing behind him, wide-eyed and hopeful. The crowd had grown larger, whispers spreading among the onlookers. Phones were raised, capturing the scene as Snoop Dogg stood tall against the gang. The bikers noticed the cameras, their discomfort rising, but Vince refused to back down. "You think you can walk in here and tell us what to do?" "You don't know who you're messing with," Vince said, his voice growing louder, trying to reclaim control of the situation. Snoop took another step forward, his towering presence unshaken. You're right. I don't know you and I don't care to. But I do know this. You're not going to mess with him anymore. Scarface, one of Vince's closest cronies, tried to bolster his leader's confidence. Come on, Vince. He's just some old dude trying to act tough. Snoop tilted his head slightly, his sunglasses reflecting the gang's unsure expressions. Old? Maybe. But tough? Try me. The crowd let out a collective gasp, a mix of excitement and tension rippling through the air. Vince's temper flared, and he gestured toward Snoop. Get him! Two bikers moved toward Snoop, trying to intimidate him with their size. One swung a heavy chain, while the other cracked his knuckles ominously. But Snoop didn't back down. His voice was sharp, commanding attention. Last chance, fellas. Walk away, and we can call it a day, or step up and regret it. The chain-wielding biker lunged, but Snoop sidestepped with ease, grabbing the chain mid-swing and yanking it free. The biker stumbled, his confidence shattered, as Snoop tossed the chain to the ground. The second biker charged, swinging wildly. Snoop ducked and countered with a quick jab to the man's shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. The crowd erupted in cheers, their earlier fear replaced with awe. Who's next? Snoop asked, his voice calm but firm. Vince hesitated, his cocky exterior beginning to crumble. His gang had never faced this kind of resistance before, and the growing crowd emboldened Snoop even more. You're all bark, no bite, Snoop said, his words slicing through the silence. But if you want to keep barking, I've got time. Omari, standing behind Snoop, felt a surge of courage. Yeah, leave me alone. You guys aren't so tough now. The bikers glared at the boy, but Snoop stepped to the side, shielding him. The kid's got more guts than all of you combined, he said, his tone laced with both humor and challenge. The crowd began chanting, their support for Snoop and Omari growing louder. Stand up! Stand up! Vince's face turned red as he realized the situation was spiraling out of his control. The bikers exchanged nervous glances, their bravado replaced by unease. Snoop stood tall, his calm confidence unshaken. What's it gonna be, Vince? Walk away, or do I have to teach you a lesson? Vince clenched his fists, his face dark with anger. The growing crowd and Snoop's unshakable composure were turning the tables, and he knew it. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. Not in front of his crew, not in front of the town, and certainly not in front of Snoop Dogg. You think you're a big shot, don't you? Vince snarled, his voice laced with desperation. This isn't one of your music videos. Out here it's real life, and in real life people like you don't scare us. Snoop remained calm, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. People like me? Funny, Vince. You sound scared already. The crowd buzzed with murmurs, their phones capturing every moment. Vince's gang shifted uncomfortably, their earlier bravado dissolving into uncertainty. Even Scarface, usually Vince's most loyal follower, seemed hesitant. Let's finish this, Vince growled, pulling out a crowbar from the side of his bike. He waved it menacingly, taking a step toward Snoop. The crowd gasped, and Omari instinctively backed up, his face pale with fear. Snoop didn't move. His voice, steady and commanding, sliced through the tension. You really think that's gonna scare me? You've already lost, Vince. Everyone here knows it, even your boys. The bikers exchanged nervous glances, their leader's aggression making them increasingly uneasy. One of them muttered, Maybe we should just leave, Vince. This is getting out of hand. But Vince was too far gone, his ego driving him to a breaking point. He swung the crowbar wildly, but Snoop sidestepped with ease, his movements controlled and precise. The crowd roared as the crowbar slammed into the ground, sending a shower of gravel into the air. That all you got? Snoop asked, his voice calm and almost mocking. Vince charged again, swinging with reckless fury, but Snoop was ready. He caught Vince's wrist mid-swing, his grip like iron. The crowd erupted in cheers as Snoop twisted Vince's arm, forcing him to drop the crowbar. The sound of metal hitting the ground echoed in the silence that followed. Vince stumbled back, clutching his wrist, his confidence shattered. Snoop stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "You done yet? Or do you want to keep embarrassing yourself?" The bikers, seeing their leader falter, began to retreat. Scarface, his usual bravado replaced with fear, stepped forward hesitantly. "Vince, maybe we should just go. This isn't worth it." But Vince wasn't ready to admit defeat. "We're not leaving," he shouted, his voice cracking. "We own this town. No one, especially him, is gonna tell us what to do." The crowd, emboldened by Snoop's stand, began to jeer. "Leave him alone," someone shouted. "You don't own anything." Vince's eyes darted around, realizing the crowd's support had fully shifted against him. The weight of their judgment pressed down on him, but his stubborn pride refused to let him back down. Snoop, sensing the moment, stepped closer, his voice sharp and commanding. "Look around, Vince. The only thing you're owning right now is your failure. Walk away while you still can." The crowd's chants grew louder. "Walk away! Walk away!" Omari, gaining confidence from Snoop's presence, stepped forward cautiously. "You're done, Vince. Just leave." The bikers, seeing their leader's authority crumble, began to pull back. "Come on, man," one of them said, grabbing Vince's shoulder. "This isn't worth it." Vince hesitated, his pride battling with the reality of the situation. Finally, he shoved the biker's hand away and glared at Snoop one last time. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice trembling. Snoop didn't flinch. "Yeah, it is." With that, Vince turned and walked toward his bike, his gang following reluctantly. The crowd erupted into cheers as the bikers revved their engines and sped off, their dominance in the town finally broken. Snoop turned to Omari, his expression softening. "You okay, champ?" Omari nodded, a small smile breaking through his nerves. "I am now, thanks to you." The crowd surged forward, surrounding Snoop and Omari with cheers and gratitude. Phones continued recording as people thanked Snoop for standing up against the bikers. The park, once a place of fear, now buzzed with hope and unity. As the rumble of the bikers' motorcycles faded into the distance, the atmosphere in the park shifted from tension to relief. A collective exhale seemed to ripple through the crowd, and whispers of disbelief and admiration filled the air. Omari stood near Snoop, still clutching his skateboard tightly. His eyes reflected a mix of gratitude and disbelief as he glanced at the crowd that had rallied behind them. "You didn't have to do that," Omari said, his voice low but sincere. Snoop crouched slightly, meeting Omari's eyes. "Yeah, I did," he replied with a small smile. "Nobody deserves to be treated like that, especially not someone just trying to live their life." The onlookers began to inch closer, their earlier reluctance replaced by curiosity and a need to connect with the moment. One by one, people started speaking up. "That was incredible," an older man said, shaking his head in awe. "You put those guys in their place." A young woman holding her phone aloft added, "I recorded the whole thing. People need to see this. It's gonna blow up online." Snoop raised a hand, his calm demeanor silencing the growing buzz. "This ain't about going viral," he said firmly. "This is about standing up when you see something wrong, that's all." The crowd nodded in agreement, some looking visibly moved by his words. Omari, emboldened by the support around him, finally released his grip on the skateboard. "I thought I had to deal with them on my own," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "Nobody ever stands up to them." Snoop placed a reassuring hand on Omari's shoulder. "You're not alone, kid. And trust me, those guys, they're bullies. Bullies back down when people stand together." The attention shifted as someone in the crowd stepped forward, a middle-aged woman who had been silently watching the events unfold. "We've all been quiet for too long," she said, her voice carrying a mix of guilt and determination. "Those bikers have terrorized this town for years, and we've let them." Her words struck a chord. Murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd, and for the first time, The people of the town seemed ready to confront their collective fear. "Maybe this is the start of something new," another voice chimed in. "If he can stand up to them, why can't we?" Snoop turned to the growing group, his expression serious but encouraging. "It's not just about standing up, it's about doing it together. Nobody's asking you to be heroes, but when you see someone struggling, don't just look the other way." Omari, inspired by Snoop's words, raised his voice. "He's right. If we stick together, they can't intimidate us anymore." The park was alive with a new energy now, one of hope and resolve. People exchanged contact information, discussing plans to ensure the bikers wouldn't reclaim their grip on the town. A community that had once been paralyzed by fear began to see the possibility of change. Meanwhile, some of the bystanders' recordings of the confrontation were already gaining traction online. Clips of Snoop's calm yet commanding intervention were shared widely, accompanied by hashtags like #StandTogether and #NoToBullying. Snoop, noticing a young boy holding his mother's hand and looking up at him with awe, crouched down again. "What's up, little man?" he asked, grinning. "Are you a superhero?" the boy asked, his wide eyes sparkling with admiration. Snoop chuckled softly. "Nah, kid. Just a guy trying to do the right thing. But you know what? You can be a superhero, too. All it takes is courage and kindness." The boy smiled shyly, gripping his mother's hand tighter. As the crowd began to disperse, Omari lingered near Snoop. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice earnest. "You just did," Snoop replied with a wink. "Now don't let anyone stop you from doing what you love. Keep skating and keep being you." Omari nodded, a newfound determination in his eyes. The park, which had been a battleground just moments ago, now felt like a sanctuary of unity and possibility. As Snoop walked away, the crowd parted for him, their faces a mix of respect and gratitude. He had come into their lives unexpectedly, but his actions left an indelible mark. For the first time in years, the town felt free, not just from the bikers, but from the fear that had kept them silent for so long. The events at the park quickly became the talk of the town. By the time Snoop Dogg left, multiple videos of his courageous stand against the biker gang had already begun to circulate on social media. Within hours, hashtags like "Stand with Omari," "Snoop steps in," and "No to bullying" trended across platforms. The videos, capturing every moment from the gang's harassment to Snoop's composed confrontation, sparked a global conversation. News outlets picked up the story overnight. Local and national channels broadcasted headlines like "Snoop Dogg stands up to racism" and "Rapper becomes real-life hero in small town." Clips of his calm yet commanding demeanor were played on loop, inspiring millions. Commentators praised not only his bravery, but also his ability to de-escalate a volatile situation without violence. Meanwhile, the town itself experienced a seismic shift. The park, once a symbol of fear due to the bikers' dominance, became a place of pride. Families returned with their children, skateboarders gathered with renewed confidence, and small business owners near the park reported a noticeable uptick in foot traffic. The bikers' intimidating presence had been replaced with a sense of community resilience. For Omari, life changed almost overnight. His story resonated with people far beyond the small town. Messages of encouragement flooded his social media accounts. Professional skateboarders reached out, offering mentorship and opportunities to train. A local business even started a fundraiser to help Omari pursue his skating dreams, and within days, it surpassed its goal. "I've never seen anything like it," Omari said in an interview with a news channel. "I just wanted to skate and be left alone. I didn't expect someone like Snoop Dogg to show up and have my back." The incident didn't just change Omari's life, it also ignited conversations about systemic issues like bullying, racism, and bystander apathy. Community leaders, inspired by Snoop's actions, organized a town hall meeting to address these problems directly. At the meeting, residents spoke openly about their experiences with the biker gang and the fear that had silenced them for so long. "We've been complicit in our silence," one attendee admitted. "But if a visitor can stand up for what's right, so can we." Local law enforcement also took notice. Embarrassed by their inaction, the police department launched an investigation into the biker gang's history of harassment. Within days, several members of the gang were arrested for outstanding warrants and other illegal activities. The gang's stronghold on the town crumbled, and their retreat marked a turning point for the community. As the story continued to gain traction online, public figures and influencers weighed in. Celebrities praised Snoop Dogg's actions, calling him an example of using fame for good. Advocacy groups highlighted the incident as a call to action, urging people to intervene when witnessing bullying or racism. "Snoop didn't just step in," one tweet read. "He showed us what courage looks like. It's time we all do the same." Amid the widespread attention, Snoop himself released a brief statement on his social media platforms. Accompanied by a clip of him shaking Omari's hand, the caption read, "Standing up for what's right isn't about being a hero. It's about being human. Proud of Omari and the people of this town for stepping up. Let's keep that energy going." The post garnered millions of likes and shares, cementing the moment as a cultural milestone. Back in the small town, the change was palpable. People began to speak up more, not just against bullying, but also in support of each other. The park became a meeting place where strangers turned into friends, united by the belief that they could create a better, safer environment. For Omari, the ripple effects of that day went beyond the immediate attention. He felt a newfound confidence, not just in his skating, but in his ability to face challenges. With Snoop's words echoing in his mind, he resolved to be a voice for others who might feel powerless. The bikers had tried to intimidate him into silence, but instead, they had sparked a movement, one that proved that courage, unity, and kindness could overcome even the darkest of moments. The park basked in the golden glow of a quiet evening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just days ago. Omari stood at the edge of the skate ramp, his board under one arm. The scars from the confrontation lingered, but they no longer weighed him down. Instead, they reminded him of resilience, his and the town's. As Omari practiced his tricks, a small group of skaters gathered around him, cheering him on. Some were friends he hadn't seen in weeks, too scared to venture into the park before. Now, they felt emboldened. The once desolate park was alive again, a testament to the community's strength and transformation. Meanwhile, Snoop Dogg's impact extended far beyond the town. His actions had sparked a global dialogue about courage, standing up for others, and breaking the chains of indifference. On a live stream addressing his millions of followers, Snoop shared a heartfelt message. "This ain't about me being a hero," he said, leaning toward the camera. "It's about knowing when to stand up and say, enough is enough." Omari showed strength. The town showed heart. And we all showed what happens when good people come together. His words resonated deeply, reaching not just fans, but everyday people who felt inspired to make a difference in their own communities. Initiatives sprang up across the country, focusing on anti-bullying campaigns, community-building events, and empowering youth. Back in the town, residents took ownership of their renewed spirit. A local councilman announced plans to turn the park into a safe, inclusive space, with enhanced lighting and patrols. The town's youth spearheaded efforts to repaint the ramps with vibrant murals symbolizing unity and resilience. Omari found himself at the heart of this change. He began volunteering at local events, using his story to encourage others to pursue their dreams and speak out against injustice. "You don't have to be Snoop Dogg to make a difference," he told a group of young skaters one afternoon. "You just have to care." As the sun set over the town, Omari performed a flawless kickflip, landing on the board with newfound confidence. The crowd erupted in cheers, not just for the trick, but for everything it symbolized. This was more than a victory over bullies. It was proof that even the smallest actions could ripple outward, creating waves of hope and change.